Hello, MotoAmerica fans. This is Paul Carruthers, and this is the weekly MotoAmerica podcast, Off Track with Carruthers and Bice. I'm joined, as always, by Sean Bice, who's out in Ohio. I'm in rainy Southern California. We're not going to talk about the weather, but I'm sick of it, and that's not why I pay high taxes, but whatever. That's my problem and not yours. Today, we have Hayden Schultz on our show. Now, Sean knows I'm famous for messing up names, and I'm surprised I haven't called him Matthew Schultz or Hayden Gillum or Hayden Schultz or whatever. But anyways, Hayden's a good guy. He's one of our REV'IT Twins Cup racers, and he's coming off a really good Daytona, and we're going to talk to him about that in a minute. But first of all, I wanted to catch up with my buddy Sean. How's everything going, Sean?
Yeah, it's really good out here. It's weird because we, of course, have knocked out the Daytona round, but we have not started our Medallia Superbike series yet. So it's interesting that will be round one for them at Road Atlanta on at the end of April here coming up. And we're at the end of March, so we got a little bit time to build up for it. But it is interesting that those guys, since they don't get underway at Daytona, and we've already got. Of course, the 200 is not counted towards that championship in Supersport, but like the fact that you were saying about Hayden Schultz, that there's already one round under their belts in what is it, Twins Cup and Hooligan and Baggers, yeah. So they go in with some already some track time going. So
it's weird because it seems like it's been a long time since Daytona already.
Doesn't it?
Yeah. And then we have another, almost a month, almost exactly a month until we get to Road Atlanta. So it's like, but it's kind of cool. We've talked about this before too. It almost makes it seem like, like there's two opening days of, the season, because we had Daytona that opens everything or opens partially everything. And then we go to Road Atlanta and literally everything is there. So it'll be good to get started again. I'm excited for Superbike racing. Don't get me wrong. I love baggers. I love twins. I love all of our classes. But the Superbike series, I think this year is really looking to be an interesting season. I mean, it's just the fact that there's so many variables and we're not sure how guys coming back at, Tony Elias and Cameron Beaubier, are they going to be right at the front? Is it going to take them a while? We know Gagne is going to be there. We know those other, we know Schultz and Peterson are going to be there. It's just the other guys, there's just a lot of questions about how it's going to start out. And I just think Road Atlanta is just going to be, really cool to watch.
Yeah, there's a lot to be found out. And then the other thing is, last year, of course, we had our first round at COTA. So that was a track that Danilo Petrucci knew. And of course, he won the first two races of the season. And then the first race at Atlanta, he had some momentum going there. But I'm not saying that we have riders this year in our series that don't know Atlanta, but it's more of a track like what the majority of the tracks that we race at in our series is like. So it's kind of cool to get back to racing or starting off racing Superbike at Road Atlanta again, I think.
Yeah. And Road Atlanta is just always an eye opener for somebody that hasn't been there, so whenever we get somebody from Europe, we've eased them in before, like at COTA. And then you bring them to Road Atlanta and they're like, oh, wow, this is MotoAmerica Superbike racing. It's like, it's just got a bit different feel than what they're used to. Road Atlanta is difficult because it's got a lot of ups and downs and blind stuff. And, it's one of those places that really, it helps a lot if you know where you're going, because there can be some tricky sections there. So.
Yeah. What's funny, Paul? So you brought up something, and I know we got to get Hayden on here. So Hayden, apologize for a minute. I got to digress. We hear this a lot of times where the European riders or the riders that are used to racing over there say, we have our tracks are different because our tracks are pretty much all multi-purpose tracks where cars and bikes go on them at the same time. But my feeling is that's what racing is in the US. We shouldn't have, it's just a different way of racing than maybe racing in Europe. So it doesn't mean that, our tracks are necessarily any worse. You could say they have more character. And I know there were definitely some tracks that Danilo Petrucci liked a lot, and other riders that have from other countries that have raced here. So I don't know. It's kind of weird sometimes. And it's probably because of MotoGP that, those tracks I guess, set the standard for what tracks are supposed to be like in the world. But if you counter with the argument that the United States invented superbike racing, which we did, then superbike racing started on tracks like we have nowadays, probably arguably tracks that were a little had maybe even more character than the ones we have now. And I put character in quotation marks. So sometimes I'm like, geez, I don't think we have to be apologetic about what we have. We have a unique type of racing, and if you come here to race in it, you have to learn how to do it. So, that's what it's all about, I think.
Yeah, it is eye-opening for them, though, because they're just used to such different racetracks. I mean, they're used to big, smooth, wide racetracks, and they're not, they get a little spooked when they see, tire walls and even air fence and things that are, somewhat out, or a lot closer than what they're used to seeing them. But I think it's mostly, I want to say it's mostly bumps. I mean, their tracks over there get resurfaced all the time. They complain about bumps over there. They don't know what bumps are until they come to some of the tracks that we have. But, it's like my dad always said, and Wayne Rainey always says, it's like, if, sometimes there's bumps and the best, and what you have to do is avoid them, and everybody's, the bumps don't move. They're there for everybody. So it's just different than what they've grown up with. It'd be the same with us. If we grew up with those big, smooth racetracks, we'd be a little spooked when we went to some place that was different. So,
speaking of growing up with it, Paul, I mean, you better than anybody can speak to the fact that the tracks back in Europe, back when Kenny raced and your dad worked with him, and even when your dad raced and you were going around the tracks and different places with, Kenny and with your dad and everything, and mom and the family, there were tracks where they were literally crossing railroad tracks, right?
100%. I mean, when my dad came here to race and we all moved here, Road Atlanta was his favorite track because he said at the time that was the only one that was close to European tracks because they're longer. When he raced, they were mostly on street circuits. So he loved Road Atlanta. He thought Road Atlanta was cool, and he was kind of pissed when they put the chicane in on the back because he liked that fast stuff. I mean, the chicane wasn't there when he raced, obviously, but he doesn't like watching it. He wishes that the chicane wasn't there, which would be pretty nuts in this day and age. But yeah, the tracks, it's funny because the tracks over there have evolved just 100%. Like I said, they were mostly street circuits, and then they evolved into purpose-built racetracks. And now they're these wonderful, perfectly smooth, perfectly wide, purpose-made racetracks. And that's what we have. But, and we have Road Atlanta and places like that. And you know what? We have, the tracks have character. Our guys that grow up racing on them are used to them. They like them. And here we go.
Yep, exactly.
Well, let's bring Hayden in before he's probably asleep, but we'll bring him in, wake him up here. Hayden, just like we mentioned earlier, Daytona was the opening round for the REV'IT Twins Cup Championship. Hayden finished 3rd and 5th in the 2 races. So, there's a podium and there's an almost podium. And when you're at Daytona, the difference between 1st and 5th, 6th, 7th can sometimes be minuscule. So a good weekend and all for him. Last year at Daytona, he won a race. He had a non-finish in the first race and he won the second race. And that was his only win last year. He went on to have 5 total podiums, and he finished, I think, fifth in the championship. But what really killed him last year was, and I think, we'll talk to him about this here in a second, but he also had 5 DNFs. And if you just throw, 10 or 11 points out for each of those DNFs, he's a lot further up in the championship. I mean, it's easy to say that, but and harder to do it. But I'm sure one of the things that he's looking forward to this year is cleaning up, the DNF portion of his point score, because it does make a big difference. Well, Hayden, welcome to the show. My question for you is, and I've often wondered this, last year, as I mentioned, you had a DNF and a victory. This year, you had a 3rd and a 5th. So you come out of it with roughly the same amount of points. Which one of those feels better? The DNF's got to be a kick in the nuts, but the win makes you feel like, you're on top of the world. Is that better than 2 consistent finishes?
Well, I think, first of all, thank you all for having me on the podcast. I'm a frequent listener, so it's great to finally have my own episode. But yeah, no, to answer your question, this year, I did what I wanted to do, which was come away with a couple consistent points paying finishes, including a podium. So that was great. I actually come away with more points this year, just by a couple, than I did last year. But truthfully, last year did definitely feel better. Coming away with a win, and my first MotoAmerica win was something that you can't, especially at Daytona. It's not something you can really, replicate or I don't know. A third and a fifth just doesn't really compare. And now, although I would have liked to have finished that DNF, especially a race where we obviously were competitive since we'd come up the next day and won the race. You win at Daytona. It's hard to beat that. Now, yeah, this year, I think also the fact that I wasn't maybe in the mix as much as I'd have liked for the win also has to play a factor. Now, had it been a big draft in a group and something like that, maybe it might be a little bit easier to stomach. But to be honest with you, I felt like I kind of got my butt kicked this year. And so that's been pretty motivating going into this break between now and Atlanta. So last year definitely has to be the better feeling weekend. You come away with more confidence from that than you do. Now, I don't want to say confidence because I'm pretty confident about the rest of the year. I've got a really good team in bike, but when you win a race, it's hard to beat that feeling.
Hey, now I got to start out by asking you a question that I've never asked you before. And it's something I can't believe I haven't asked you before. So I want to preface this by saying, occasionally when we have on our social media, when we show Hayden Gillum and he's got the 69 bike, you'll get some people that are uninformed and they'll be like, oh, blasphemy. He shouldn't have that number. And we're like, hello, the guy's name is Hayden. Plus he's actually a cousin. He's in the family. So, we always have to school some of these people that think it's so wrong that anybody would use Nicky's number. But I've never asked you this. Is your name Hayden because of Nicky, the Haydens and Nicky Hayden?
No, it's not. And you would think so. You would think that I come from a racing family, especially because my younger brother's name is Colin, like Colin Edwards or something.
Yes,
but
exactly
we were,
right.
my family it's pure coincidence, and we're not related to, my dad wasn't a racer or anything like that beforehand. So it's just kind of funny how it works out that you've got a Hayden and a Colin in my family, but no relation, no, preconceived idea that was going to happen at all.
It's funny because there in your age group, I guess, to your point, there are a fair number of people in this world with the first name of Hayden, and a lot of them I'm sure are because of Hayden or Nicky Hayden or the Hayden family. But I thought, well, it's also a name that's kind of popular. I've heard it several times. I've even asked people, when I've heard the name just walking around, like, do you know who Nicky Hayden is? And sometimes they've heard of the name or whatever, but you can tell instantly they're not fans or anything. So it's something I always wondered, and that's you're right about your brother Colin. I never thought of that part about it, but that you got them both going for you. So, and you're from Arkansas, which, okay, Corey West is there, Corey Burleson is there. Yep. And of course, John Kosinski. Do you know much about John Kosinski and being from Little Rock and all that?
Of course, I know of John Kosinski and know all about him and his racing accolades, but I've never met the guy. Don't know him. But there are actually a fair amount of a few decent racers from Arkansas. I live about an hour away from Corey West. He lives in Eureka Springs, which isn't too far, and Corey and Isaiah Burleson, they live in Harrison, which is about an hour 45 away. So they really don't live too far either. But John down in Little Rock's a little bit further. He's about 3 hours. So I never really ventured down there too much, and haven't encountered him.
So you were telling us, we were trying to find out where you are at now, because we knew last year that you were, I guess you were in the Indy area, weren't you? Because of your relationship with Gene Burcham and Vance and Hines and all that. Am I right? Or am I wrong about that?
Yeah, no, that's correct. So last year, right before Daytona, I moved up to Brownsburg, Indiana, which is just on it's in the Indianapolis area.
Larry Lawrence's town.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Yeah. So moved there and primarily just for the reason that, my racing was based out there and Gene and Gary and Ron Dinklid, the guys that helped me, they're all based in that area. So the idea was to go down there and be closer to that. So I moved to Brownsburg, and I was actually about 2 or 3 miles from Vance and Hines race shop. So it was actually on my usual running and cycling routes was by the race shop. So I go by there all the time. And I actually used to work at the race shop at a couple different instances in previous years, unrelated to this venture up to Indianapolis. So it's kind of cool that I was up there for a while, but ended up moving back to Arkansas, Northwest Arkansas in December. So that's where I'm based now.
Okay. And I want to keep going with this a minute, Paul. So, you were working with Vance and Hines, and you still work with him as a rider and a racer, and still work with Gene. But for the fact that when you're not racing, you are doing something else now. Tell us what you do when you're not training or riding a motorcycle.
Yeah, so the majority of my time is actually spent working on a construction site, which is not that glamorous, but it allows me the flexibility and it pays the bills. It's tough to find a job that is cool with you going racing all the time. So luckily last year in Indiana, I worked in a warehouse, did that, but I moved back home and I work with my brother and my dad doing construction now. And it's funny, I went to college to the University of Arkansas years ago and graduated with a degree in recreation and sport management, but I've never used that degree because if you work in recreation and sport management, they're usually doing stuff on the weekends as well. So any job that I'd want to do wouldn't let me go racing. So I just I've got this degree that I've yet to use. And here I am, digging ditches and working on, the footings and foundations of houses, just putting in a blue collar job because that's what lets me go racing. And that's some of the, I guess, unseen sacrifices you see with a lot of privateers like myself that have to work. You don't really get to maybe start a career that you envisioned as a kid because you have to do something that gives you the freedom and the flexibility to go, take off for many weekends out of the year to go pursue this dream.
Yeah, I mean, that's why I wanted to bring it up because, in this day and age, the way things work, there are much fewer riders that are, paid to race than pay to race. And your commitment, doing jobs, whatever it takes to get you to the racetrack, despite the fact that you have a college degree. And I'm not trying to differentiate the two of them at all, because certainly you don't have to have a college degree to get a great job, but you're not using your college degree because of your racing commitments. So, you make a lot of sacrifices. You riders make a lot of sacrifices that people don't even really realize. But I'm glad that works out for you and you're closer to home now. So that's got to be nice. Are you close by your family?
Yeah, so I'm about 10. I'm just not even really across town. I'm on the same side, so I really don't live too far. I just bought a house probably 10 minutes away from my parents and where they live. So I see them every day working. So it's nice being able to go home a lot. My wife's family is here as well, here in Fayetteville, Arkansas. So she's able to see her family, which for her, that's a big thing because she doesn't usually come to the racetrack with me. So when I'm gone, a month out of the year racing, it's good for her to be able to go home and see her family and have people to hang out with. So that was a big factor in us coming home. And it works out pretty well because it's tough being away from home, especially when you're in a new place, especially for my wife. So it's been working out pretty well.
All right. I'm going to bring it up because you brought it up at Daytona, but you are a bigger boy, so to speak, and you're in better shape now than what I remember when you were younger. Probably a little baby fat because you were so young. But do you feel like you're at least through the race that probably hurts you the most with the fact that you're, some of these guys you're racing against are pretty little people?
Yeah, Daytona is definitely a challenge, and I knew it was going to be a challenge, and it's not for lack of effort. I'm just naturally a pretty stocky guy. I'm built like my dad, and that provides some challenges. So Daytona was definitely tough. You get on the banking, and Last year it was more manageable. I mean, the pace really wasn't as quick. This year the pace was a lot faster in the infield, which wasn't so much, a problem. It's the fact that you get on the banking, and if you lose a draft, it's much harder to catch that draft, especially when everybody else takes a step forward with their bikes as well. I mean, I've got a really strong bike, so that's not where the shortcoming is, but you're going against, your competitors that weigh 130 pounds. So it's tough to match that. So that was by far the most challenging weekend that I hope that we're going to face. But it also sort of, lit a fire under me coming home from Daytona, because I'm pretty determined to try to minimize that problem as much as I can. So, even in the week since I've been home, I've been able to lose a fair amount more weight. And the goal is just to try to lean out as much as I can before Atlanta, just to make it less of a problem, because it's tough, because I've trained pretty hard over this off season, and then to see you still have, a lot of work to put in, it's a little humbling, and not that I was, surprised, but it's tough being a stockier guy. I don't lift the weights, but I still carry a lot of muscle. It's harder for me to lose fat. So, focusing in on a diet, and also just kind of increasing some of the workload, truthfully, and working out, and, also just find some other ways to train, to suit my body type, and to figure out what works best for me has been pretty important. But it's what we face, and it's been something that's been a challenge since I've been in Twins Cup, especially you're riding a bike that doesn't make as much power as a 600 or a super bike. So that weight makes a lot more, or it just is a lot more important. So I've been putting in a lot of work recently, so hopefully when we get to Atlanta, that pays off, and we suffer less. But it's something that has to be done.
Right. Okay. Since we haven't had you on the show before, I think it's important, and you mentioned it a little bit earlier when we were talking about your name, but you don't come from a racing family. Your father didn't race, etc. How did this all begin for you? I mean, how did you stumble upon motorcycles, or was there some relative or some friend, or just tell us a little bit about how you got to this point?
Yeah. So when I was, my family, nobody in my family raced or really had motorcycles beforehand. So when I was 4 years old, my dad went to the local dealership, and he wanted to buy a 4-wheeler for us, because we had a little farm. I wanted to buy a 4-wheeler for me to ride, and you had to be 6 years old to buy a 4-wheeler, so they wouldn't sell it to them. But they did say, we've got a PW50 here with training wheels we could sell you. And so he went home and somehow convinced my mom that was acceptable. That was a good alternative. And then it sort of took off from there. So I started racing motocross for a long time, and did that. Grew up racing motocross. I went to Loretta's on a 50cc when I was younger. And really what got me into the road racing side was asphalt. That same dealer, Bill Eddy, who actually came and watched at Daytona, he owned the local dealership, and he took us to a kart track, and we put street tires on my KTM 65, and I tried supermoto, and I fell in love with it immediately, and also found out that I was a little bit better at that than I was at motocross. So winning is more fun. So that's what I started to pursue. And at the time, we actually owned a motocross track in Stillwater, Oklahoma, that Guy Cooper had built, called Cooperland. So pretty good sized motocross track. And then I took off and started pursuing the road racing thing. I actually took a couple years off when I was 10, because I wanted to live like a normal kid. I think I got burnt out because I was racing motocross so much that I didn't realize what I had. And so eventually got into the road racing thing, and when I was 12, and then it's kind of just gone since there.
So Hayden, I mean, do you feel a lot, this is just natural when you talk about riders where they started. You usually start on a PW50 or something off-road, because you can't ride on the street, or you can't go to track day or whatever. So it's a natural progression. But at this point, and you said supermoto, at this point in road racing is your thing now, right?
Yeah, definitely. Road racing is definitely, the primary focus. I still do ride some motocross for training. I've got a KX 250 sitting in the garage. I'd love to do some supermoto right now, but frankly, I just don't have a bike to do that right now. So road racing is it. That's where all the effort goes to.
Yeah. So tell us, I want to know a little bit about this R7, relatively new R7. Yeah. So they had this FC07 that became an MT07, and it was kind of a standard or a naked bike, I guess, or a standard style bike. And then they created this R7, which has still got a lot of FZ07, MT07 components in it, but it's obviously a pretty strong weapon now. And it did well last year, did well at Daytona. What is it about the bike? And let's compare it to, let's just say, to the Aprilia, because that seems to be, there's, the prominent other brand or manufacturer in Twins Cup. Mm-hmm. But it seems to be that there's several things that the R7 does maybe better or equally as well. It's certainly a good bike. So tell us about it a little bit.
Yeah, the R7 is awesome. So I did race the MT07 before the R7 came out in 2020. So I've had a chance to compare that, and I did race half a season on an R660, although it was a stock engine, so it doesn't compare completely to what I'm racing against now, but I can kind of give ideas of where the two bikes differ. So first of all, between the MT07 and the R7, the main difference you'll see is just how it sits. The R7 feels like a completely different motorcycle, even though it shares, almost everything on it, is the same. But because that MT07 has, a fairing kit, it wasn't meant to be a sport bike that was raced. It definitely feels like that. So the R7's much narrower and quite a bit shorter. Maybe that's just because it's narrower, but like for me, I'm not that tall. So sitting on an MT07, it was like the tallest bike I'd ever ridden, even though it was only an MT07. But the R7 is quite a bit more comfortable. And so besides that, almost all the parts are the same. There's not that much that differs. Actually, a lot of the parts that I still have on my R7 are what I had on my MT07, including the suspension. The suspension I have on my R7 is exactly what we had on our MT, and we just swapped it over, and it works great. Now, compared to the Aprilia, there's definitely some differences. And this year, things have changed a little bit. It seems like they made a pretty good step with the Aprilia from what I can tell at Daytona, but it's hard to get a really clear judgment on how it is based off Daytona because it's not like the rest of the racetracks. So I think in Atlanta we'll have a better idea, but it seems like the Aprilia does get off the corners better this year, and maybe is made some improvement in the top end. I know they did get rods this year. Now that's, I think they also were able to spend a bit more time on that bike, and Matt and the guys at REV'IT Engineering are really smart and do a great job building those machines. So, you give them a winter to tinker with things. They're definitely going to make improvements. And I think that was shown at Daytona with the bikes that they brought. The bikes are definitely different. So when I rode the Aprilia, again, stock engine. So it's different than what they're riding now, but the range of RPMs that you could use was maybe less than what I feel like the R7 has. So to me, the R7 was maybe a little bit easier to ride. The Aprilia, you had to ride a little bit higher in the RPMs, more like a 600 or a two-stroke, maybe, to make sure you stayed in the power band of that bike. And then it definitely was different because it doesn't have a linkage on the rear. So setting up that bike was quite a bit different. And that was one of the things I think I might have had a hard time wrapping my head around, was the feeling of, trying to figure out what the bike was doing, because you don't have a linkage on the rear. So it goes directly to the engine. So that was a challenge for me as well. And that was one of the things that I really struggled on the 660, and ended up going back to the R7, and immediately going back to the R7, I felt back at home. So not to say it's not a great bike. I just feel like I got along with the R7 as well. And also, being a bigger guy, the R7 does tend to has more torque. So it helps to have that torque to get out of the corners.
It's funny. I was going to kind of make this analogy that in my experience, it's always seemed like Yamaha have never been the fastest bikes out there, but they've always been among the best handling, the best cornering bikes. Is that the case with this R7, or is it kind of the opposite?
It's hard to tell because it varies on racetracks. I feel like it depends on where you go. Like we saw last year how, especially at the end of the year, how quick Caleb DeCarroll was on the Aprilia R660 at Barber, and how it seemed like the R7s maybe struggle a little bit more. It's hard to say because all the R7s maybe have a little bit different setup. You have people using different linkages, different geometry, different offsets on the front end, because there's so much that you can change on these bikes that it's hard to tell what maybe is like the bike and what is the setup. And again, these R7 chassis aren't the most stout thing out there that I've ridden. So It definitely flexes a lot, and it provides some challenges sometimes as well. So you have to figure out what the best way to ride this thing is. And I think some guys that have jumped into the class and ridden the R7 have kind of maybe, been surprised at, the way you have to ride this thing. It's not like riding your usual 600 or 1000. To answer your question, I'm not really sure. It's hard to tell because I haven't ridden the Aprilia back-to-back recently enough to know, what the answer is. But I don't want to make any excuses because I feel like we've got a pretty good setup, and our bike's been in a good spot. So it's just a matter of feeling confident and feeling comfortable.
Well, one of the things that's interesting is that you said, it's not, the frame is basically, the frame is not the same as on the R7. And it's because it looks like, there's like a couple of plates around the swing arm pivot. Is that right? It's something that added some stiffness to the frame. Is that correct about the R7?
Yeah, correct. So that's one of the primary differences between the MT07 and the R7 is the side plates that just bolt onto the frame and are supposed to help with stiffening it up. Now I've raced the R7 with the plates and without the plates over the course of the last couple of years. To be honest, I haven't done it back to back enough to tell you if I can give you a noticeable difference. Supposedly it does make it stiffer. Whether it's a big difference, I can't really tell you. It's tough.
Yeah, I wondered. That's why I wanted to ask you, because I know when the bike came out, they made kind of a big thing about that piece, and I'm like, well, really, is it a difference maker? So that's interesting.
No, it'd be nice to test them back to back. One of the struggles I think our small program has is not really getting much testing time. We're running on a tight, small budget. So there's a lot of things like that I would like to test so I can answer questions like these for myself, and then also to others that ask it, because we do get a lot of inquiries from people building R7s and MT07s looking for feedback or ideas on what the best thing to do is. And it's just something that eventually I hope we get to, but we run on such a small program, tight budget that testing some of these things just hasn't been a possibility yet.
Yeah, but Hayden, man, you must have some interesting conversations with your mentor, Gene Burcham, because you have a very cerebral approach to that bike in that class. And it feels like you almost have to have that for a class that kind of was derived from Twins bike club racing, SV650s and stuff. There's so much tuning and things being able to be done and adjustability with those bikes. You have to be kind of on top of your game, not only as a crew chief, but as a rider too. And I can tell that you've got that. I mean, you obviously can speak about rebound damping and ride height and preload and everything else, right? It sounds like you really understand the dynamics of a motorcycle.
I try to. I don't know if Gene would agree with that, dealing with me on a week out basis. But I'm really fortunate to have guys like Gene, Gary, Dink. Those guys are so smart and they know what they're doing. So I trust a lot in them, and luckily I've been able to absorb quite a bit from them. Now I will be the first to tell you that I really don't know that much. I couldn't go out and set up my bike without them. But I do try to me, if I can reason through things, or at least get Gene can we've been working together for a while, so he usually can explain to me what things are doing, to make sense of how to set the bike up, which direction we want to go. And, get us to the right point. And I'll say last year, having James Rispoli also ride one of our other bikes helped me a lot as well, because James has ridden so many different bikes and he's got so much experience. Sometimes trying to verbalize what I was feeling, was tough. And then I'd talk to James and talk through it, and he'd experience some of the same things I could. And I was like, yeah, that's it. That's exactly what I'm feeling. I just had a hard time putting into words. So that, having James ride our bike for part of the season last year helped. Having guys like Gene that have a lot of experience in a lot of different disciplines, from road racing, flat track, motocross, all that stuff. It really helps us out. And has allowed us to be, we were able to be pretty consistently at the front last year. And I give a lot of credit to them for knowing, where to steer the ship.
All right. You seem like a person who would analyze your results from the year previous in order to try to make improvements for the following year. And I'm pretty sure you've probably done that with your 2022 season. As I mentioned earlier, you had 5 DNFs. I didn't look back to see whether those were crashes, whether they were bike failures, whether they were a combination of both. They probably are a combination of both. You would obviously know that. What was the issues last year with 5 DNFs?
That's challenging because it's not challenging. Actually, I spent all winter looking over it. But cleaning up the issues is something that I've been trying to focus on for this year, because without those things, we came away with 6 podiums last year, and which was actually tied with for the most with anybody in that class. But the problem was all those DNFs, and that's what really kept us from fighting it out for the championship until the end there. Part of it was, we had a couple small mechanical things, but the majority of it was rider error. We just had weird things. And a lot of it is with this R7. We keep pushing it further and further, like faster and faster every year. The Twins Cup has gotten so fast. It's crazy. So, you're always trying to push and make improvements. And sometimes you just get caught out, trying to figure. Last year, the class was really stacked. So trying to figure out the right blend of being aggressive and conservative, knowing when to sit back in the race was tough. And people, I had so many people telling me, oh, you need to be more aggressive, and no, you need to wait, you need to be less aggressive and all this. So, it's hard to know. It's much easier to say that after the fact than to know exactly what to do in the race. So, at Laguna, we had a big high side. At New Jersey, we had a weird crash that I had never lost the front on the Yamaha ever until a crash in the race at New Jersey. So it was kind of weird things that I hadn't experienced that much. I mean, we high-sided a bike with less than 100 horsepower, which is, you're pushing so hard that you have these things happen that haven't happened before. And then you also have some things that were just rider error. Like I ended up taking a penalty at Pittsburgh because I blew the chicane, which was a 5-second penalty, which we actually crossed the line first for. So we could have won that race had I not made that mistake. And, but those are the things that run through your head after you come to terms with that, you lose the championship, and that's just things that you have to clean up. And that's one of the things at Daytona that's why I was so focused on just coming away with good points, because I didn't have the chance to test over the off season. So I knew that, could you push more in the infield and maybe try harder to stay with those guys? Sure. But do you want to make those mistakes and come away with 0 points for one of those races? Definitely not. So you have to play the long game. Not to say that you want to be conservative throughout the entire season, because the season just started, but you do have to, you can't win the championship in the first race, but you can definitely lose it and make it hard on yourself. So to come away with more points than we did last year, I can't really complain too much, because it's a long season. We're going to tracks that we've done well at in the past. So you have to give yourself a chance. Right.
Now, I'm not sure the answer to this, but how involved are you in the day-to-day running of that team? And if so, what's the most difficult part of it? Is it hunting down sponsors? Is it calling sponsors? Is it getting sponsors to pay? I mean, what does it all involve for a guy like you that has to, work during the week and, like you said, dig ditches just to go racing? How much of the other stuff takes away from the actual riding the motorcycle?
Yeah, a lot of that stuff is pretty challenging. I'm pretty fortunate to have an awesome team that takes care of all, working on the bikes and doing all that stuff. And actually last year I did, being close there, I was over at Gene's house where all our bikes are. Everything's based, probably 4 or 5 days throughout the week. So I was there quite a bit. Now I wasn't rebuilding my motors. I mean, Gene does most of that, but I was still there to, give a hand, do whatever I needed to. So now coming back home, I'm not involved in the day-to-day working on the bikes as much. But I still do a lot of the, administrative work. So, I mean, as y'all know, when I've communicated before, if it's press releases or signing up, like entering, making sure all that stuff sorted out, that's what I still do. So grateful to have a lot of help, but we still are a small team. So I don't have, people that can do that for me. And it does take quite a bit of effort on the sponsorship side. That stuff is down to me as well, which finding sponsorship help is tough, especially in this day and age. Trying to find, funding for your program is extremely tough. I've got some good sponsors behind me, but it's by no means, funded solely through that. So a lot of it does come down to working week in, week out. And, I know between myself and Gene and Gary, we've put a lot of our own money into this program to make it go. And it's not because we're expecting to see a return on it. It's just because we love racing and it's what we do.
Yeah. Hayden, I want to point something out to you, and it's coming from, I've had a career in advertising, PR, writing, and Paul's been journalism and writing and PR as well. You do a good job with your presentation skills when you're in our press conferences, the videos you've created on this podcast. You're a very articulate young man, and it's impressive to see that. And that's obviously a huge asset to anybody's career, but certainly since we're talking about road racing, it's a good asset for you to have as you move forward in your career. And it's certainly helping you on this team as it is now. So that's big credit to you. So the education that you've gotten and what you've been able to learn in the school of life, I think has really, really served you well so far.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I try to, be articulate, be presentable, be a good representation for my sponsors. And it's definitely something that does come with some work. I'd obviously like to be able to do more of that sort of thing with the PR. I used to do more with my brother as far as creating content and videos, but like anything, it takes, money and time. And that's something that in a small program, we don't have an abundance of. So I like to do more, but I'm grateful to have, the support I do that allows me to do the things we have done.
So I want to bring up a few things that are a little bit off topic here with you, just because of the fact that I feel like I can talk to you about a lot of different things. So you mentioned your brother Colin. I mean, we get to see him. He's awesome with what he's doing in video production, and now he's working a lot with ESPN Latin America, right? Is that
yeah, Deportes or something? Yeah.
So that's a cool opportunity for him, and it's always great to see him in the paddock. And I always laugh because you write about it's Hayden and Colin, but you guys don't really look all that much alike to me at all. Do people realize that?
Actually, a lot of people, now that a lot of people know Colin, he used to be just my little brother that ran around the racetrack talking to everybody and having fun. But now, he used to come to the track and film for me. And the whole goal with that was eventually that somebody that could actually pay him would pick him up to do video for them. And that's what happened. Luckily, he works with Roberto and Robertino Pietri a lot doing that, which is awesome. And it's cool that he has his own thing. So we don't look alike. He's a little taller and skinnier. So he doesn't, if you didn't know we were brothers, you wouldn't know. So there's a lot of people that know us individually from each other and didn't know we were brothers until we talked to him about it last year. And there's probably still people that don't know that we're brothers, because if you looked at us side by side, you wouldn't know that immediately. So it's funny now. I am Colin used to be known as more Hayden's brother, but now I'm also Colin's brother to a lot of people. So it's funny how that narrative, changes as he, has his own group of people that he hangs out with or knows at the track that might not know me.
So here's something I want to bring up along the line. So we know Colin, we know Hayden. I don't know if you've got just three in your family, but I do know you have a sister. Is she the other member of the family?
Yeah, my she's the real athlete of the family. I'll break on her for a second because she's a diver, like a springboard diver. And she is, man, if I was as good as her, if I was as good at road racing as she was at diving, I would not have to work construction. I'd be set. But she's incredible, and she actually just wrapped up her career. So proud of her for all she's accomplished. But she she's got to go to world championships for Team USA before. So she's traveled the world, gone to China, Japan, Russia, Hungary, all these places diving. And she won an NCAA championship as a freshman, actually just got third last weekend at NCAA championships, and won 8 SEC titles. So she's the real deal. And it's been really cool to see her have her own athletic career and accomplish way more in diving than I have in racing so far. So yeah, she's got her own life, her own, athletic, deal going on. And she's just finishing that up. So it'll be interesting to see where she takes that, now that she's done diving.
Well, and such a difference from you. I have a feeling your sister doesn't ride a motorcycle, and I don't know. Are you a good diver? Are you a good swimmer? What?
I actually tried diving. We started diving at the same time. I think I was in 6th grade maybe. But she had grown up being a gymnast her whole life. So she was a lot more adept at the flipping and spinning and doing all that stuff. It came a little bit more naturally to her. And I was this chubby little kid that was trying to dive, making big splashes and belly flopping. And I decided landing on your back and smacking on the water in a cold pool hurt more than crashing a motorcycle. So I decided to go back and ride motorcycles because I was better at that. And it felt a little more natural.
The interesting thing though, Hayden, about that with your sister, and I think your posts on Facebook or whatever, I've seen some photos of her, and she you have a real strong upper body, pretty, kind of triangulated. So does she. She's got some muscle there, right?
Yeah, no, she's really strong. She's, I remember, while ago, especially growing up being a gymnast, you develop a lot of muscles, but she's really muscular as well. So I've told her now that she's done diving, she needs to get into a sport like CrossFit or weightlifting or something, because I think she'd be really good at it because she's so naturally strong and has that, already, there. So I think she would be really good if she decided to pursue some other form of fitness like that.
I agree with you. So another thing I want to talk to you about that's a little off topic is, sometimes I feel like my life is flashing before my eyes. So I don't know if I'm off on the chronology of this, but I know that you got married, and I don't think you've gotten to your first anniversary yet. Have you?
No, not yet. May 8th is our first anniversary. So I got married in between Atlanta and VIR last year. Okay. And so it's coming up.
Yeah, I couldn't, sometimes things happen. I'm like, oh my God, that was 2 years ago, not last year. So it was last year. So
it was.
Yeah, you haven't quite made it through your first year yet. So how's it going, Hayden? How's married life for you?
Oh no, it's great. We just bought our first house a little over a month and a half ago. We've got 2 cats, which are pretty entertaining. And she's still putting up with me. So I really can't complain. Everything's been going pretty smooth. So shout out to Logan for being a trooper.
Yeah, she's awesome. Great name too. What does she do, Hayden?
She's a nurse. So she's my sugar mama right now that helps pay the bills while I go racing.
I was going to say, you didn't get to buy a house because you're a road racer.
No, definitely not. No, I will say that I myself could not afford to buy a house right now. It's all gone to racing.
That's okay. We're glad you do it. Well, listen, we kind of covered a lot of topics. I kind of run out of time, but we got to get you on again, and not and sooner than later, because you're a terrific guest to have on, and we're going to pay much attention, as we always do, to your career and your racing, starting up again at Road Atlanta in a few weeks, and we'll look forward to seeing you there. So, Paul, do you have anything you want to throw in there for Hayden Schultz?
No, I just wanted to thank you for joining us as always. And as Sean actually just said, you're a wonderful guest. You're well spoken. You're thoughtful, and I have little worry that even beyond road racing, you'll be able to use your college degree and get the job of your choice. So you got no worries, and
awesome.
You seem like you're pretty employable to me. So
I appreciate it. Yeah, thank you guys for having me on. It's been great.
Hey, one quick thing, Hayden. So Paul's team is San Diego State University. The Aztecs are still in it. Mm-hmm. Arkansas is still in it too. So
they are.
Are you into it?
Oh, big. Yeah. Huge Arkansas fan. When I was a little kid, I would cry when Arkansas lost. So it's funny because they just beat Kansas last round, and my mother-in-law and my wife, my mother-in-law went to Kansas and my wife grew up a big Kansas fan. So watching the game with them, I couldn't maybe let out as much as I would have liked to see them win. So to see that they're still in it, especially when they didn't have that great of a regular season, is awesome. So I'm counting down the hours until, tip off tonight for the Sweet 16.
If I cried with every San Diego loss, I'd be drained in a puddle.
Being an Arkansas fan's been a tumultuous relationship, just growing. It's been challenging. So I'm just hoping for a little more success.
Yeah. Well, good luck.
Yeah, good luck.
Good luck to y'all.
Good luck to both you guys. I got nothing with my team, so they're gone. They didn't get in it. But anyway, all right. Well, thanks, Hayden. Great to have you on. And I just want to let everybody know. So our next round and our first round of Medallia Superbike will be coming up at the end of April, and certainly get MotoAmerica Live Plus squared away for this year if you haven't already done it and didn't have it for Daytona. I want to shout out again to the corner workers too. I mean, we are always looking for volunteers for that. Road Atlanta is a great track to be a corner worker at. There's a need for it at every one of our rounds. So if you get on our website and look it up, or go to the Facebook page for MotoAmerica volunteers, and that's your inroad to get involved in being a corner worker with us. So anyway, thanks again, and we'll talk to you guys next time. Thanks.
All right, you guys take care.